This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. You can visit their store by using my referral link in the description below. Hi everyone, I'm Nizzanotes, and today is Saturday. That means it's time for Nizzanotes, my weekly vlog series about limited magic. Last week we took a look at some bad March of the Machine cards that people are playing a lot more than they should. Today we're doing sort of a companion piece to that. We're going to look at cards that are being taken pretty late during drafts, given how high their win rates are. Again, as usual with these videos, when we're this late in the format, and I'm talking about, bad cards and good cards, the main source of data that we're using is 17 lands. It's a great resource for looking at data for thousands and thousands of drafts, so you have more than just your own anecdotal evidence about how cards have performed. You can sign up for 17 lands. It'll track your data and, creates a larger data pool for everyone else. So yeah, like last week, we looked at cards that people are taking way too high, given how much they're winning. This week, we're going to do the opposite. We're going to look at cards that are being taken later than they should be. Basically, cards that are probably better than you think they are, based on, how the hive mind, anyway, is drafting right now. All right, so as usual with these, I like to provide a baseline so that you sort of know how good these cards are in compared to other things. So I wanted to pick a common that's really, really good, Kenra Spell Spear. This has a win rate of 55.5%, which is a pretty good one. It is lower than you might expect for this card overall. Going into the format, it looked like this was going to be like a 60% win rate card, but it has a good win rate. People are taking it around the 3.6, so in between the third and fourth pick on average. Almost every card we're going to look at has a higher win rate than this and is also being taken a lot later. So keep this card in mind when we're talking about this. Another thing to remember that I always want to point out, these win rates aren't quite as impressive as they look because, the way 17 lands ends up working is the people who use it are the people who are really interested in data and improving their game. Thus, they tend to have a higher win percentage than most people. So the average win rate for a 17 lands user, instead of being 50%, which is what it would be, if we took everyone who's playing on Arena, that's what the win rate would be. Instead, it's more like 54%. That's sort of the average. So 55.5 is good. I mean, 1.5% higher than the average win rate is a significant bump, but it's not like amazing. And honestly, the Spell Spear is probably being taken a little too high at 3.69. All right, so let's dive in. First, let's take a look at Omen Hawker. So this is a 1-mana 1/1 that can tap and produce mana for abilities. It has a win rate of 56.5%, which is quite high, a full percentage point higher than the Spell Spear. It's being taken around the 9th pick. Now, there is an interesting sort of phenomenon here. This data isn't the end-all, be-all. It doesn't tell us absolutely everything about these cards. You shouldn't just go into a draft and take cards based on their win rates. It probably wouldn't end that well for you. There's a lot of other stuff going on. And one thing that is going on is that blue is the best color in the format. So, every blue card, because it's being played with other really good blue cards, is probably going to be having a higher win rate than it would otherwise have. That said, even when we take that into account, correct for that, the fact that Omen Hawker has a 56.5% win rate is something we need to look at, especially because it's being taken around the 9th pick. So why has this turned out to be good? Well, the most obvious thing, is having a blue 1-drop is good just because of Convoke. So even if you don't get to use this ability, just playing a 1-drop that can help you convoke things is a big deal. I mean, convoke is part of what makes blue so good in the format. This helps you do it. On top of that, the Omen Hawker does have a lot of uses. It can help you transform all of those transforming Phyrexian creatures. Like when you can accelerate and transform, your 1/3 that gained you 3 life when it entered the battlefield into a 3/3 that's a removal spell. When you can make that happen two full turns earlier, that's like a huge deal. And you can also, on its own, it can turn the incubators into creatures. So, this does a lot of stuff. And that's, lately, 1-drops, we haven't had that many 1-drops that are complete duds in a while. And more often than not, they just end up being pretty good cards and limited. They have to do stuff, but the Omen Hawker certainly does. It has the Convoke synergy, which really helps it, its fail case even be an okay card. So, you know, it's much better than you probably think it is. Maybe not quite as good as 56.5% will tell you, but it is a very good card. Next, let's look at Seed of Hope. So this one does have a lower win rate than Kenra Spell Spear. It's got a win rate of 55%, but it's being taken around the 12th pick. And this is what I talked about a few weeks back when I was talking about cards I was just wrong about in the set, 20 drafts in or whatever. The ones that was clear I was wrong about. Seed of Hope was one of them, because I didn't really think this would be playable. But it turns out having one of these in a lot of your green decks is kind of where you want to be. It just ends up being like pay 1, draw a card, gain 2 life, and then it has a little bit of extra synergy going on, but that ends up being a fine card. It's certainly not amazing, but you should probably try to find room for one of these in most of your green decks. Going deeper than 1, things get a little sketchier because you do need cards that actually do stuff, and this doesn't really. It just breaks even on card advantage, but its effect is meaningful enough, sort of thinning out your deck while helping you find a card a little better than just a straight up card draw would. It basically never whiffs, so it ends up being a quality common for sure, and one that you should be playing. Next up, let's look at Rayav Master Smith. This is one of the Multiverse Legends. He's got a win rate of 57.7%, and I think that's extra impressive because red-white overall isn't like an amazing color pair in terms of how it's performing, but Rayav has this really high win rate. It's being taken around the 10th pick. Now, this is a case where this card is obviously a build-around. It's about, having equipment. The great thing about Rayav, though, is there's lots of decent equipment in the set, especially in red and white. You don't have to work that hard to make it do a thing. And the turn you play him, you can often get value right away. I mean, the upgrade he delivers when you just have some random equipment attached to something when he comes down is just massive. So he is an interesting card in that he's not going to perform like a 57.7% win rate card all the time. And the fact that he's taken as late as the 10th pick isn't quite as shocking as it would be if it was just good everywhere. But, if your red-white deck has even 1 equipment in it, Rayav is worth running. And if you have 2, he's really worth running. I mean, he ends up really being a card your opponent has to kill if you have even 1 equipment around. And that's pretty great to have on a 2-drop. Next up, there's Unseal the Necropolis. So this is picked around 8.5, so between the 8th and 9th pick, and it has a win rate of about 57%. So very high win rate. This is a card sort of like Seed of Hope in that I don't really love having more than 1. Unlike Seed of Hope, it does net you card advantage because you do draw 2 basically when you play it. But having one of these in basically all your black decks is where you should be. I mean, it ends up giving you a late game boost that is really important, especially if you can get back things, if you have bombs, obviously, but even just getting back creatures with enter the battlefield abilities, creatures that can transform and give you some effect. Like, there's so many value creatures you can get back with this in this format in the late game that it's great. The fact it mills both players ends up mattering sometimes too, especially if you're in a deck like blue-black, but really any black deck should be running one of these. There's not a black deck in the format that shouldn't be. And the fact that you don't usually want more than 1 is part of why it's being picked where it is, but it should probably still be prioritized a little more than it is right now, since it delivers such good card advantage in the late game. Next up, there is Emody Celebrant of Bounty. This is one that has mystified me since day one. Going into the format, I think I gave this a B+ in my set review, which is really high. So I loved it, and I've loved playing with it. Yet somehow, and it has a 58% win rate, which is, I think, well, actually, it's only the second highest win rate of any card that we're going to talk about, but it is the highest that's being picked this late, which is around, between the 7th and 8th pick. I think people see this card. I mean, I see it late so many times. I've had decks with multiples of them. I think people see that it's a 5-mana 3/1, and then it has this ugly frame and their eyes glaze over or something, because I just can't figure out why people aren't playing it and why it's being taken as late as it is, because by my estimation, it's a card you should be first picking, and the win rate kind of tells you the same thing. So it's a 5-mana 3/1, that's bad, but it's going to give you something else. Even if you just hit a 2-drop, or even if you just hit like a Omen Hawker with it, like you paid 5 mana for a 3/1 and a 1/1 and they both have some additional upside. Is that great? No, but you can also hit a 4-drop with it and then play a 6-mana card on the next turn, at which point the game is just over. It is A very powerful card. It's further augmented by the fact that it's easily splashable in this format too. Green, especially if you're in green can splash things really no problem at all. And pretty much every other color can too. So it's very splashable. The one thing that you do have to keep in mind with it, and this may be playing some role in people not wanting to play it, it is pretty bad if you have like multiple copies of the 2-mana counterspell. That it is a good card. Like that's a card you end up running in lots of blue decks. And if you have like 2 of those, Emody gets a little sketchy because you're just going to whiff. Sometimes you're going to hit the counterspell and nothing happens. And that's not good. But Emody is way better than that card is individually. So if I had to choose between the two, I would just choose Emody every time. You know, you usually get 2 cards worth of value out of playing 1 card. And that's good. And this card has been one of the better of these multiverse legends uncommons by a lot. And again, I can't understand why I'm still seeing them so late. It's been of benefit to me, but I really think people need to be taking it higher and valuing it more. Next, let's talk about Judith Scourge Diva. So she's not quite as extreme as some of these others. She has only a slightly higher win rate than Emody at 58.3%, but I still think she's being taken too late at the 4th pick or so. This is by far the card that's being taken the highest, but like Emody, it's a card that I can't understand why people aren't first picking most of the time. She is gold, but again, fixing's good in this format. Splashing her is easy. And sure, she's less good than Emody as a splash card because you do kind of want her to come down early, but she has a huge impact on the board basically all game long. If you play her late, she buffs everything. She makes combat a nightmare for your opponent. If you have sacrifice stuff, it's even more insane. The impact she has on the board is absolutely massive. And honestly, you know, even if you don't play her till late, that's fine. You know, she has a big impact. So she's a card that should be taken a lot higher than she is. You know, she's already being taken pretty highly. Like people aren't undervaluing her quite like Emody. People are more in on Judith than they are Emody, but 4th pick is way too late for this card that if it's not dealt with, just wins you the game in most scenarios. All right, so let's move to back to some cards that are being taken really late. Maybe they don't have as high of a win rate as Judith, but they're being taken much later, and they have some similar success. For example, Saiba Cryptomancer. So this has a win rate of 58%, same as Emody, picked around the 8th pick. Yeah, I mean, this thing has just turned out to be really good. It has a lot of flexibility. You can obviously, you know, the sweetest thing to do with it is flash it in, give one of your things hexproof and a counter, and keep it from getting killed by removal. But you can even use it as a trick in situations. Obviously, you don't love doing that unless your opponent's tapped out. But if +1/+1 counter is going to win your creature a combat and your opponent can't do anything about it at the time, then that's great. The Cryptomancer also makes for reasonable like sacrifice fodder after it puts a counter somewhere else. It has hexproof itself, so you can slap auras on it and stuff, and sometimes that ends up being amazing. So it just has a lot of different uses. You can flash it in and block a 1/1. I mean, there's all these little things it does, and none of them are like incredible. I mean, I guess being able to use it with the times where you get to use it and it just blanks a removal spell, those are probably the swingiest plays that help it have as high of a win rate as it does. But it does all these other little things too. So it's another one of these cheap cards. It just does a bunch of stuff, gives you a bunch of value, and for that reason, it ends up having a really high win rate. And this isn't one that I'm like, you only want one of or whatever, like Seed of Hope or Unseal the Necropolis. Like, I think I'd play like 3 of these in a lot of my blue decks. You know, you do need other creatures because the Cryptomancer on its own isn't exactly a threat, but you end up having enough other creatures or auras to slap on your Cryptomancers that it all ends up working out pretty well. Next, let's look at Marauding Dreadship. This is being picked the 2nd latest of any card we're going to look at. It's being picked around 9.8. Has the same win rate as Kenra Spell Spear, which is 55.5%. So this is a card I talked about when talking about cards that had overperformed so far in the format, you know, about a month back or whatever, early in the format. And it continues to be overperforming, but people don't seem to have corrected when they're picking it because you can still get it so late. And red is the worst color in the format in terms of win rate. And, you know, that's partly why Spell Spear is maybe around 55.5, by the way. But that doesn't mean you're not drafting it. That doesn't mean you should be leaving cards that are this nice this late in the pack. I mean, you know, people are taking Spell Spear as high as they are, and, you know, the Dreadship has the same win rate. The thing that's great about the Dreadship is that it gives you two things, because it gives you the Incubator and a 4/1 with haste. There are lots of situations where you can play this and attack your opponent with it right away. They don't have any good blocks for it, or they just have to take it. That feels pretty good. There are other situations where just having these two bodies is great if you have some sacrifice stuff going on, for example. And in general, like, the rate on this card is just pretty good. I mean, it's sort of a 5-mana 2/2 that gives you a 4/1 haste vehicle, which is something that I think you'd play. You know, it's not amazing. Its win rate reflects that it's not amazing, but it's certainly better than a card that should be getting taken as late as it is. On a related note, there's also Furnace Rains. This has a win rate of 58.3%, so same as Judith, Scourge, Diva, being taken around the 8th pick. This is another one that's sort of in the same neighborhood as Rayav. It being taken this late isn't quite as crazy because it's a build-around card. Like, you don't really play this in any deck except black-red, and I have it here not necessarily to say maybe you should be taking it higher like some of the others. I mean, maybe you should, especially if you started out in red. But what I want to draw your attention to is how insane this is. Like, the win rate it has is close to bomb level when it is in, you know, a situation when people are playing it in the good deck for it, which is generally black-red. Because you can steal a thing and sacrifice it. The treasure you get ends up really mattering too. There's enough synergy in the format for this to be a good card that it is. I mean, you don't play it in every deck, and that's why it's being taken sort of late. But when you play it in the right deck, it's one of your best cards. So value it accordingly. And then our last card is Astral Wingspan. So this is a nice combo, by the way, with Cyber Cryptomancer. This is one of those auras that you can put on it. But you can put it on anything. It makes basically any creature into a threat. +2/+2 and flying is a huge boost. You draw a card. That's key. If it didn't do that, this wouldn't be nearly as good, obviously, because drawing the card means getting 2 for 1 isn't quite as much of a beating. Obviously, you don't have to worry about that if you're putting it on a hexproof creature like Cryptomancer, but if you want to put it on some other creature that's much larger that can get in for a big hit, you know you're not going to get completely devastated. You don't always find yourself in a situation where you can convoke this, and, you know, that keeps it from being incredible, because sometimes you do just have to pay 5 for it because tapping down a bunch of your stuff isn't worth it. But it has a win rate of 56.2%. It's being picked between the 8th and 9th pick. And I think basically any blue deck should be happy with the first copy of this. And right now, based on where it's being picked, based on the games I'm playing, people aren't playing it as much as they should be. Making any creature into a threat, making sure that you have some insurance against a 2 for 1, and generally kind of winning. Like, the situation your opponent ends up in is either they kill the thing and there's a 1 for 1, maybe they get some tempo, or they don't and they lose. That's kind of what Astral Wingspan ends up doing in most situations, and neither of those are that bad for you. You know, them killing the thing isn't amazing, of course, but it's not that bad. I mean, because you get to draw that card before they do. You do have to make sure you cast it when they can't respond by killing the thing you're targeting, of course, or then you do get utterly blown out, and then it is bad. But if you're playing it correctly and carefully, you don't have to worry about that. And it ends up just being a card that, you know, one scenario wins you the game and the other one is like, well, that kind of stinks, but I'll be okay. And that's a good card. All right, so that will do it for this week's Nizzanotes. Those are 10 cards that are probably better than you think they are in March of the Machine. I'll be back next week to talk about Limited some more in vlog form. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and share it so that others can enjoy it too. If you want to catch future editions of Nizzanotes, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to catch up on past videos about Limited or draft videos for this format, you should see some playlists on your screen shortly. Thanks for watching.